I never imagined my life would take such a sharp turn. At 52, I thought I had it all figured out. My children were grown, I had a quiet house in a small town, and my days were filled with mundane routines. Grocery shopping on Tuesdays, volunteering at the local library on Thursdays, and dinner alone every night. Loneliness became a silent companion I had learned to accept. It was safer that way, no expectations, no disappointments. But all that changed on a rainy afternoon at the grocery store. I remember the sound of raindrops pelting against the windows as I wandered the aisles, lost in my thoughts. That's when I saw him. He was standing by the fresh produce, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 30s. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he had a rugged, confident look about him, like someone who had seen the world and survived it. I felt a jolt of energy rush through me, something I hadn't felt in years. He noticed me staring, and instead of looking away, he flashed a smile, genuine, warm, with a hint of mischief. "Do you know if these peaches are any good?" he asked, holding one up as if it were a precious jewel. I laughed, caught off guard. "Depends if you like them sweet or tart," I replied, my voice almost cracking from the surprise of speaking to a stranger, especially one so charming. He introduced himself as Adam, a military man recently stationed nearby. There was an ease about him, a lightness that drew me in. We chatted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. I learned he was new to town, just back from deployment, looking for a sense of normalcy. I found myself lingering, savoring the unexpected connection. When he suggested grabbing a coffee sometime, I said yes without thinking. It felt reckless, but in that moment I didn't care. I walked out of that store with my heart pounding, a mix of excitement and fear swirling inside me. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of something much deeper than a casual flirtation that I didn't expect to see him again so soon. It was only a few days later when I was sitting at the small cafe near the park, sipping my usual black coffee that he walked in. Adam spotted me immediately, his face lighting up with that same mischievous smile. He came over without hesitation and asked if he could join me. I nodded, feeling a strange blend of nerves and excitement bubbling up inside. We talked for hours that day. It started with simple things: how the town was treating him, stories from his travels, and anecdotes about life in the military. He spoke with an honesty that was disarming, his deep voice carrying a mix of seriousness and humor. I found myself laughing at his jokes, something I hadn't done in so long it felt almost foreign. As the weeks passed, our coffee meetups became a regular thing. Sometimes, we'd go for walks along the river, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his family, how he had grown up in a small town just like this one but had left for the army right out of high school. He was restless, he said, always looking for something more, something real. I understood that restlessness all too well. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how easy it was to be around him. He made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. We joked about the most trivial things, but there were also moments of silence that felt comforting rather than awkward. He had this way of looking at me, his blue eyes piercing yet gentle, that made me feel like the only woman in the world. One day, as we sat on a park bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reached over and took my hand in his. It was such a simple gesture, yet it sent a shiver through me. I looked up at him, trying to gauge what he was thinking. He gave my hand a light squeeze and smiled. "You know," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "I don't know how I got so lucky to meet you." I felt my cheeks flush, like I was a teenager all over again. "I'm the lucky one," I whispered back, almost afraid to admit it out loud. For the first time in years, I wasn't just passing time. I was living, feeling, and letting myself enjoy the present moment without overthinking the future. I knew there was an unspoken attraction between us, but I was too scared to acknowledge it. He was younger, by at least 2 decades. It felt impossible, but at the same time, it was the most natural thing in the world. I could feel the walls I had built around my heart starting to crumble, brick by brick, with every touch of his hand and every shared laugh. It was terrifying, but I couldn't deny the joy he brought into my life. It was a rainy Tuesday when it happened. We had made plans to meet at the cafe, but the downpour had us both drenched by the time we got there. Adam suggested we skip the coffee and go back to his truck instead. He cranked up the heater, and we sat there, laughing at how soaked we were. The sound of the rain drumming on the roof felt oddly soothing. For a moment, it was just the two of us, the rest of the world washed away by the storm. He pulled off his wet jacket and leaned back, turning to look at me with that crooked smile of his. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the warmth of the truck, the scent of rain, or the way he was looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. It was like a dam breaking. I felt it, the pull, the want. It wasn't just a simple crush anymore. It was something deeper, something that made my chest ache with a longing I hadn't felt in years. I found myself staring at him, tracing the line of his jaw, the scruff of his beard, and the way his damp hair clung to his forehead. He was so young, so full of life, yet there was a depth in his eyes that mirrored my own. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I turned away, staring out the window as the rain blurred the world outside. It was the first time I allowed myself to admit it, even in the quiet of my own mind. I was falling for him. It was terrifying, the realization of it. I was a woman in her 50s, a widow with a quiet life, and here I was, drawn to a man half my age. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. I turned back to him, forcing a smile. "Nothing," I lied, but I knew he saw right through it. He always did. He reached over, his hand finding mine. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down my spine. "You sure?" he pressed gently. I swallowed hard, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes. It's been a long time since I felt this way," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. It was such a tender gesture, so full of unspoken understanding, that it broke me. I let out a shaky breath and met his gaze. "I'm scared," I confessed. "Of what?" he asked softly. "Of what I'm feeling," I said, my voice cracking. "Of what this could mean." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. "You don't have to be scared," he murmured. "Not with me." It was a simple promise, but it felt like the most important one I'd heard in years. In that moment I knew. This wasn't just a fleeting attraction or a passing infatuation. It was something real, something that scared the hell out of me, but also made me feel more alive than I had in decades. I closed my eyes, leaning into the comfort of his touch. I didn't know what the future held for us, or how long this feeling would last, but for the first time in a very long time, I was willing to take the risk, and I drove home that night in a daze, barely noticing the lights of a city passing by. My mind was a whirlwind, tangled up in feelings I thought were long dead. I was supposed to be past this stage of life, wasn't I? The roller coaster of new love, the sleepless nights filled with yearning. Those were for the young, not for a woman like me, grounded in routine and memories. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he looked at me like I was something precious. I felt giddy, but at the same time, there was a knot of fear deep in my stomach. What would people think? What would my friends say if they knew I was falling for a man young enough to be my son? The thought made me shudder. I told myself it was just a passing crush, a silly distraction. But the truth was, every time Adam sent me a message, my heart would race. When his name popped up on my phone, it was like a spark of electricity shot through me. We talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Movies, music, childhood stories. I felt like I was rediscovering the world through his eyes, and it was intoxicating. But the doubts crept in, gnawing at me when I was alone. I'd look in the mirror and see every wrinkle, every gray hair. I'd picture us together, walking down the street, and all I could imagine were the judging stares, the whispers behind our backs. What could he possibly see in me? I'd think. I was well into my 50s, with a grown daughter, a life filled with responsibilities and the quiet solitude of someone who's learned to live alone. He was in his late 20s, vibrant, energetic, with his whole life ahead of him. One night, I was sitting on the couch, wrapped up in my blanket, sipping a glass of wine when the phone rang. It was Adam. His voice was soft, almost tender, as he told me about his day, how he'd gone hiking, the way the sunset looked over the hills. He asked if I'd ever hiked that trail before, and I laughed, telling him it had been years since I'd done anything like that. You should come with me next time, he said. The offer caught me off guard. I don't know if I could keep up with you, I joked, but there was a vulnerability in my voice I couldn't hide. You underestimate yourself, he replied, his tone serious. You're stronger than you think, Natalie. It was the way he said my name, like it held weight, like I was someone who mattered. It made my breath hitch. Adam, I started hesitating. You know I'm older, right? I mean, you must realize how this looks. There was a pause, and for a moment, I regretted bringing it up. I almost held my breath, waiting for his response. I know, he said finally, but I don't care. Do you? The simplicity of his answer left me speechless. Did I care? I wanted to say no, but the truth was more complicated. I did care. I cared because I had spent decades following the rules, worrying about what was proper, what was acceptable. But for the first time, I felt like breaking the rules. I felt like choosing what made me happy, even if it made no sense to anyone else. I took a deep breath. Maybe I care too much, I admitted. Then let me care a little less, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I laughed, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. It wasn't a sad tear. It was the kind that comes when you've been holding your breath for too long and you finally exhale. You make it sound so easy, I whispered. Maybe it can be, he replied, if we let it. For the rest of the night, I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to his voice as he talked about the stars he could see outside his window. And for once, I let myself believe it could be that simple. That love, no matter the age or circumstance, was worth the risk. The idea simmered in my mind for days before I found the courage to act on it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversations in my head, feeling the flutter of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. I was like a schoolgirl with a crush, but also a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. I told myself 100 times it was just an innocent invite. After all, we talked about our favorite foods, about how he missed homemade lasagna, something his mother used to make for him. So I decided to cook for him. That was it. A simple, friendly dinner. I wasn't planning anything else. But deep down, I knew this was my way of bringing him into my world, of testing the waters to see if what I felt was real when we were alone together. I spent the entire day preparing. I cleaned the house like it was a special occasion, set the table with my best dishes, and made sure to light a few candles. I even put on a dress I hadn't worn in years, a deep, midnight blue that hugged my figure just enough to make me feel confident. It was silly, really. I laughed at myself, standing in front of the mirror, applying a bit of lipstick. Why am I acting like this? I thought. But the truth was, I wanted to feel beautiful for him. When the doorbell rang, my heart jumped into my throat. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door to see Adam standing there, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand and a shy smile on his face. These are for you, he said, holding them out. I took the flowers, feeling a lump form in my throat. You didn't have to do that, I managed to say, but inside I felt like a giddy teenager. You look amazing, he said, his eyes roaming over me in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped aside to let him in, trying to keep my cool. I hope you're hungry. I made enough food to feed an army. He laughed, following me into the kitchen. I'm starving, and it smells incredible. We sat down to eat, and for a while it was easy. We talked like we always did. About his plans, my stories from the past, the way the lasagna reminded him of home. But underneath the laughter, there was a tension I couldn't ignore. It was in the way his hand brushed against mine when he reached for his glass, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. By the time we finished dinner, the air was thick with unspoken words. I gathered the dishes, suddenly feeling nervous, like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I'll get these cleaned up, I said, avoiding his gaze. He reached out, gently taking the plates from my hands. Leave them, he said softly. They can wait. I looked up at him then, really looked at him. He was standing so close, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. My breath caught in my throat. Adam. Natalie, he interrupted, his voice low, almost pleading. I've been wanting to do this all night. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me, slowly, like he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kissed him back, letting go of every doubt, every fear. It was a kiss that melted away years of loneliness, A kiss that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in decades. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. "This isn't just a fling for me," he whispered. "I hope you know that." I swallowed hard, nodding. "I know," I said, though my voice was shaky. "I know." In that moment, I realized what I had done. I had invited him into my home, but more than that, I had invited him into my life. And now there was no turning back. We stood there for a moment, suspended in time, as if the entire world had fallen away. His hands were on my waist, gentle yet firm, and I couldn't help but lean into his touch. It felt like everything I had been missing, everything I had pushed aside for years. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine, as if he needed confirmation that this was what I wanted too. "Are you sure about this?" Adam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, feeling the rapid thrum of my heart against my chest. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "I've never been more sure." His eyes softened with relief, and he kissed me again, deeper this time, like he was savoring every second. We moved together through the small hallway, hands grasping, fingers threading into hair. It was a clumsy dance of passion and hesitation, but it felt right, like we had been waiting for this moment for so long. When we reached the bedroom, he paused, looking around as if he were trying to take in every detail. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, standing there in the dim light of the room that had held only my own solitude for years. But there was something different now, something thrilling about letting someone into this sacred space. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. I laughed, though it was a soft, breathless sound. "Yes, but not for the reasons you might think." He raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And what reasons might those be?" I bit my lip, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "I'm nervous because this feels like the start of something. Something real." His expression shifted, becoming more serious as he took a step closer. "It is real, Natalie. I haven't felt this way in a long time. Maybe ever." The words hung in the air between us, raw and honest. He reached out, tracing his fingers along my cheek before letting his hand rest at the nape of my neck. "Let me show you how I feel," he murmured, his voice filled with a sincerity that made my breath hitch. And then, there were no more words. We moved together, the heat between us building until it felt like we were the only two people in the universe. It wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, a connection that I hadn't known I was capable of feeling again. He was gentle, taking his time, making me feel cherished in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. Afterwards, we lay tangled together, his arm draped across my waist, my head resting on his chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat was the most comforting sound I had ever heard. I closed my eyes, feeling his fingers trace lazy circles on my back. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. I nodded, feeling a contentment that was foreign yet welcome. "I'm more than okay," I whispered. "I'm happy." He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Good. Because I am too." We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in the warmth of each other's arms, until the early hours of the morning began to creep in. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the dawn. Instead, I felt a bubbling anticipation for what lay ahead, for the possibilities that stretched out before us. As I drifted off to sleep in his embrace, I realized that this moment, this night, was more than just a fleeting encounter. It was the start of something I hadn't dared to hope for, a second chance at love, at life. I woke up to the soft, golden light streaming through the curtains. Adam's arm was still draped around me, his breath steady and calm as he slept. I lay there, studying the lines of his face, tracing the shape of his jaw with my eyes. In the early morning glow, he looked even younger, almost boyish, like he hadn't yet experienced the harshness of the world. And yet, there he was with me, a woman far past her youth, in a house filled with the echoes of a life long lived. A flood of emotions surged through me as I watched him. I felt happiness, yes, but also a twinge of sadness, a pang of doubt that whispered all the insecurities I had managed to quiet last night. What was I doing, letting myself fall for a man like this, someone who could easily have chosen anyone else? I eased myself out of bed, careful not to wake him, and slipped into the kitchen. I needed coffee, and more than that, I needed space to think. As the kettle boiled, I leaned against the counter, staring at the rising steam, feeling the weight of the last few weeks settle on my shoulders. It was like I was standing at a crossroads, looking back at the life I'd known and forward into the unknown, thrilling and terrifying all at once. I thought about the quiet years after my divorce, how I had built walls around myself, telling everyone, including myself, that I was content, that I didn't need anyone to complete me. But now, those walls felt like flimsy paper, torn apart by a simple smile from a man who shouldn't have even looked twice at me. And yet he did. He saw me. The real me, not just the older woman I saw in the mirror every day. I poured a cup of coffee, cradling it between my hands as I sank into the couch. Memories of last night came flooding back. The way he had touched me, so tenderly, like I was something precious. It wasn't just lust, it wasn't fleeting. It was something deeper. It made me feel wanted, but more importantly, it made me feel worthy. A voice in my head, one that sounded a lot like my mother's, nagged at me. What are you doing? You're old enough to be his mother. This won't last. But another part of me, quieter yet somehow more insistent, told me that I deserve this happiness, that love doesn't come with an expiration date. Lost in thought, I didn't hear Adam approach until he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I looked up, startled, meeting his sleepy, yet tender gaze. "Morning," he said, his voice still husky from sleep. "Morning," I replied, giving him a small, hesitant smile. He sat down next to me, pulling me into his side. "You're overthinking," he murmured against my temple. I huffed out a laugh, shaking my head. "You barely know me, and you already know that." "Call it a hunch," he teased, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made my heart squeeze. He took my hand in his, brushing his thumb over my knuckles. "Talk to me, Natalie. What's going on in that beautiful head of yours?" I looked at our intertwined fingers, at the stark contrast between his youth and my age. I'm scared, Adam. Scared of how real this feels. Scared of what people might say. Of the age gap. Hey, he interrupted gently, tilting my chin up so I had no choice but to meet his gaze. I don't care about the age difference. I care about you. And if anyone has a problem with that, then they can mind their own business. His words, so simple yet so filled with conviction, brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until he said it. "You make it sound so easy." "Because it is," he insisted softly. "I've never been one to worry about what others think. I know what I feel, and I feel it for you. That's what matters." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't think I'd get to have this again. Not at my age. He frowned, brushing a tear away from my cheek. "Natalie, age is just a number. You're not old, you're experienced, you're wise. You've lived a life, and that's what makes you so incredible." I laughed, the sound wet and shaky. "You make me sound like a fine wine." He grinned, pulling me closer. "Exactly. The best kind. The one that gets better with time." For a moment, I let myself believe him. I let myself lean into his warmth, feeling the solid comfort of his embrace. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't about age or what people might think. Maybe this was about two people who had found something beautiful in each other, against all odds. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes as I rested my head against his chest. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Adam. I'm in. I'm in this with you." He pressed a kiss to my forehead, his arms tightening around me. That's all I wanted to hear. And just like that, the doubts faded into the background, replaced by a quiet, steady joy. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out. As the months went by, I found myself living in a world I had thought long closed to me. The laughter, the unexpected road trips, the shared silences that felt full rather than empty. Every day with Adam was a revelation. We faced sideways glances from strangers, awkward questions from friends, and even the occasional raised eyebrow from family. But I learned something surprising about myself in the process. I cared less and less about what people thought. There was a time when the opinions of others shaped every decision I made. But now, sitting on the porch with Adam, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I realized that I'd been living half a life, concerned with following rules written by a society that would never know my heart. "What are you thinking about?" Adam asked, squeezing my hand gently. I turned to look at him, his face softened by the golden light of the setting sun. He looked content, at peace. I reached up, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am." He raised an eyebrow, giving me that lopsided smile I had grown to love. "Lucky? I think I'm the lucky one." "No," I insisted, shaking my head with a small laugh. "You brought me back to life, Adam. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You reminded me what it feels like to be loved. Truly loved." He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. It was a soft, sweet kiss, one that felt like a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine, filled with an emotion so raw it made my breath catch. "Natalie, you're my everything. I don't care about the age difference. I don't care what anyone says. All I care about is you." Tears welled up in my eyes. But this time, they were tears of pure, unfiltered joy. "I feel the same way," I whispered. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again. I thought my chance was gone." "It's never gone," he said, pulling me closer. "Not until you decide it is." And in that moment, I knew he was right. I had spent so long believing that love was reserved for the young, that passion was a fleeting flame only meant for those at the beginning of their journey. But Adam showed me that love isn't about age. It's about connection, about finding that one person who makes everything brighter, who sees you for who you truly are and loves you anyway. We sat there, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange, the world fading into the gentle twilight. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I was ready to embrace this new chapter of my life without hesitation, without fear. "I love you," I murmured. He pressed a kiss to my hair, his voice soft but sure. "I love you too, Natalie. Forever." And as the stars began to appear, twinkling one by one in the darkening sky, I realized something profound. Life isn't measured by the years we live, but by the moments that take our breath away. And as long as I had Adam by my side, I knew I had a lifetime of those moments ahead of me. This wasn't the ending I had once imagined for myself. It was better.